The massive doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast hall filled with representatives from dozens of alien species. Captain Jake Morrison stepped through first, his black uniform crisp and his face showing the strain of 3 long years of failed negotiations. Behind him walked diplomat Lisa Kane, her blonde hair pulled back in a professional style, carrying a thick folder of documents that represented humanity's latest attempt at peaceful resolution. Colonel Ben Hayes brought up the rear, his military bearing unmistakable even in the diplomatic setting. The chamber itself was a marvel of alien architecture, with curved walls that seemed to bend space itself and floating platforms arranged in a complex pattern that put the most powerful species at the center. The air hummed with translation devices, working overtime to convert hundreds of different languages into something resembling universal communication. Jake had grown tired of the constant buzzing sound that accompanied every word spoken in this place. Council. Speaker Vexthal dominated the central platform, his tall frame covered in the ceremonial robes that marked his position as leader of the Zephyrian Empire. His forearms moved in graceful patterns as he spoke, but his words carried the cold dismissal that Jake had come to expect from these sessions. Around him sat the other major powers, including the crystalline beings whose bodies reflected light. In prismatic patterns, the methane breathers in their environmental suits, and dozens of other species that viewed humanity as nothing more than an annoyance. The human delegation requests the floor again, Vexthal announced, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he found the very idea tiresome. We will grant them 5 minutes to present whatever new demands they have prepared this week. Lisa. Kane stepped forward, her chin raised despite the obvious hostility in the chamber. She had been Earth's finest diplomat before accepting this assignment, and she refused to let the aliens see how their constant rejection affected her. Honorable Council members, humanity comes before you once again not with demands but with offers of partnership and mutual benefit. A ripple of what could only be described as laughter passed through the assembled delegates. The sound was strange because it came from so many different vocal systems, creating a mixture of clicks, whistles, and deeper rumbles that somehow combined into something unmistakably mocking. We have prepared detailed proposals for trade agreements that would benefit all participating species. Lisa continued, opening her folder and activating a holographic display that showed shipping routes, resource exchanges, and economic projections. Human colonies have discovered new methods for terraforming that could turn dead worlds into garden planets. Our medical research has produced treatments for diseases that affect multiple species types. Our engineers have developed more efficient, faster-than-light communication systems. Vexthal barely glanced at the displays. Yes, we have heard these claims before. Your species shows some promise in technical areas. We will grant you that much. However, the question remains what position you would occupy in civilized galactic society. Jake felt his jaw tighten as he recognized the direction this conversation was taking. They had been down this path so many times that he could predict the next words before they were spoken. The Galactic Council has discussed your species at length, the speaker continued, his forearms now folded in a gesture that Jake had learned indicated finality. We have reached a consensus about humanity's proper role in our civilization. The chamber fell silent except for the ever-present humming of the translation systems. Even species that had been engaged in side conversations stopped talking to listen to what everyone knew would be the Council's final judgment on humanity. Your species displays certain useful characteristics, Vexthal said, each word chosen carefully to demonstrate the Council's careful consideration. You are adaptable, industrious, and show promise in several technical fields. However, you also display troubling tendencies toward violence and territorial behavior that make you unsuitable for independent membership in our community. Colonel Hayes stepped forward slightly, but Jake held up a hand to stop him. The military officer's face was stone, but Jake could see the anger building behind his eyes. Therefore, the speaker continued, the Council offers humanity a generous opportunity to join galactic civilization under the protection and guidance of the Zephyrian Empire. Your species would serve in support roles, providing labor and technical services while learning proper civilized behavior from your supervisors. In time, perhaps in several generations, your descendants might earn the right to limited self-governance. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on the chamber. Jake stared at the alien leader, processing words that reduced his entire species to the level of servants or pets. Around the chamber, other delegates nodded approval or made gestures that their translation software interpreted as agreement. Lisa Kane's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You are offering us slavery." "We are offering you civilization," Vexthal replied smoothly. "Your species lacks the maturity for true independence. Under Zephyrian guidance, humanity could contribute meaningfully to galactic society while learning to control your more primitive impulses." Jake Morrison had served in Earth's military for 20 years before accepting this diplomatic assignment. He had commanded ships in deep space, led missions to establish humanity's first colonies beyond the solar system, and faced down pirates and hostile alien raiders. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for the casual contempt he heard in the alien leader's voice. He stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. Around the chamber, alien delegates leaned forward slightly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. "We came here 3 years ago," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space without any need for amplification. "We came offering friendship, trade, and mutual defense agreements. We brought gifts of art and music and scientific knowledge. We asked for nothing except recognition as equals and the right to govern our own worlds." The chamber remained silent, but Jake could see confusion on some of the alien faces. They had expected anger or pleading, not this calm recitation of facts. "Instead, you have treated us like children begging for adult approval," he continued. "You have dismissed our achievements, ignored our contributions, and now you offer us the privilege of serving our betters." Jake reached across the table and began gathering the documents and data tablets that Lisa had prepared. His movements were unhurried, almost casual, but everyone in the chamber understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. "Humanity withdraws from these negotiations," he said, his words falling into the silence like stones into still water. "We withdraw from all Galactic Council proceedings. Consider our application for membership permanently rescinded." Vexthal's forearms unfolded in what Jake had learned was a gesture of surprise. "You cannot simply leave. Your species needs guidance and protection. The galaxy is dangerous for primitives traveling alone." Jake looked up from his document gathering and met the alien leader's multifaceted eyes. "Then we will face that danger as free beings rather than live safely as slaves." He turned toward the massive doors with Lisa and Ben falling into step beside him. Behind them, the chamber erupted into discussion as hundreds of alien voices tried to process what they had just witnessed. "They will return," Vexthal called after them, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty for the first time. "Within a year they will come back begging for our protection." Jake Morrison paused at the chamber doors and looked back one final time at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "No," he said quietly, "we will not." The doors closed behind them with the same deep rumble, but this time the sound felt like freedom. 6 months had passed since Captain Jake Morrison walked out of the Galactic Council chambers, and the effects of humanity's withdrawal were becoming visible across human space. On Trading Station Alpha 7 near the edge of human territory, Commander Lisa Kane watched as the last human merchant vessel prepared to depart for Earth. The cargo bays that once held goods destined for alien markets now carried only essential supplies for human colonies. The station's alien residents stood in small groups, watching the departure with expressions that ranged from confusion to concern. The Altarian trader Zender approached Lisa with his usual slow, careful movements. His species lived for centuries, which gave them a different perspective on time and change than most other races. "Commander Kane, surely this isolation cannot continue indefinitely," Zender said, his translator rendering his complex vocalizations into standard English. "The human merchant fleet provided services that many species have come to depend upon." Lisa nodded, but her expression remained neutral. All human commercial operations in alien space have been suspended indefinitely. Our traders have been recalled to serve human colonies exclusively. The old Altarian skin changed color slightly, a sign of distress in his species. But the trade routes through the spiral arm. The medical supplies your people provided to the Outer Rim colonies, the technological exchanges that benefited everyone involved. Those arrangements were made in good faith between equals, Lisa replied. Since the Galactic Council has determined that humanity is not ready for equal partnership, we see no reason to continue providing services to species that view us as servants. On Earth, President Elena Rodriguez stood before the United Earth Assembly in Geneva, addressing representatives from every human colony and orbital habitat. The assembly hall buzzed with quiet conversation as delegates discussed the implications of complete galactic isolation. Elena had been elected specifically to handle the crisis with alien civilizations, and now she faced the most important decision in human history. Fellow humans, the choice before us is clear, Elena began, her voice carrying the authority that had made her Earth's most respected leader. We can return to the Galactic Council and accept their terms, serving as junior partners under alien supervision, or we can forge our own path among the stars. Delegate after delegate rose to speak, and the message was unanimous. The colonies that had been established on the frontier were particularly vocal about maintaining independence. These settlements had been built by humans who left Earth specifically to create something new, and they had no interest in accepting alien oversight. Dr. Richard Stone, head of the Advanced Research Division, provided the most compelling argument for continued isolation. During our 3 years of negotiations, we maintained research programs that focused on peaceful applications and defensive technologies. We limited our development to avoid appearing threatening to potential alien partners. He paused to let his words sink in. Those limitations are no longer necessary. The vote was taken within hours, and the result surprised no one. Humanity would maintain complete isolation from galactic civilization until they could negotiate from a position of strength rather than weakness. The resources that had been devoted to diplomatic missions and cultural exchange programs were immediately redirected to defense and technological advancement. Admiral Karen Brooks received her new assignment the same day the Assembly voted. Her orders were simple but sweeping: militarize the outer colonies and prepare for the possibility that humanity's withdrawal might not be accepted peacefully by all alien species. Karen had commanded Earth's deep space fleet during the expansion period, and she understood better than most how vulnerable human settlements could be to alien interference. The first priority was establishing early warning systems throughout human space. Teams of engineers worked around the clock to install sensor networks that could detect approaching vessels long before they reached inhabited systems. The technology was based on research that had been conducted quietly during the diplomatic period, but now it was deployed without any concern for how aliens might react to obvious military preparations. Hidden shipyards in the asteroid belts became centers of frantic activity. The designs that emerged from these facilities bore little resemblance to the exploration vessels and merchant ships that had represented humanity during the diplomatic period. These new ships were sleek, fast, and heavily armed with weapon systems that incorporated principles alien science had not yet discovered. The work was not limited to military applications. Human colonies began implementing technologies that had been developed but never deployed due to concerns about alien reactions. Terraforming projects that could transform dead worlds into garden planets in decades rather than centuries. Medical research that promised to extend human lifespans and eliminate genetic diseases. Communication systems that could maintain real-time contact across interstellar distances. Dr. Stone's laboratories on Luna became the center of humanity's technological revolution. Research teams worked on projects that would have been considered impossible just years earlier. The key breakthrough came when human scientists realized that their approach to physics differed fundamentally from alien methodologies, where alien science focused on working within natural laws. Human researchers excelled at finding ways to bend or circumvent those laws entirely. The results were remarkable. Human ships began incorporating propulsion systems that could achieve faster-than-light travel without the exotic matter requirements that limited alien vessel designs. Defensive technologies emerged that could deflect or absorb energy weapons that alien forces considered unstoppable. Most importantly, humans developed manufacturing techniques that could produce complex systems quickly and cheaply. Meanwhile, in the Galactic Council chambers, the absence of human representatives was barely noticed. The Zephyrian Empire expanded into several trade routes that humans had previously dominated, assuming that their superior technology and established relationships would easily replace human services. Other species divided up the territories that humans had abandoned, confident that the primitive newcomers would eventually return with a more appropriate attitude. Council Speaker Vexthal received occasional reports about unusual activity in human space, but these were dismissed as the desperate efforts of a species trying to appear more capable than they actually were. The few alien vessels that approached human territory were turned away by polite but firm warnings, which the Council interpreted as evidence that humans were isolating themselves out of fear rather than strength. Only Zender and a few other far-sighted individuals began to worry about the implications of humanity's complete withdrawal. These concerns were shared privately among species that had actually interacted with humans on a regular basis, but their warnings were ignored by the major powers that dominated Council decisions. The isolation period continued through the first year and into the second. Human colonies grew stronger and more self-sufficient. The technological advances that emerged from unrestricted research programs began to transform human society in ways that even the scientists had not anticipated. Most importantly, humanity developed a unity of purpose that had been lacking during the diplomatic period. By the end of the second year, humanity had become something entirely different from the species that had first approached the Galactic Council seeking friendship and trade agreements. They remained hidden behind their sensor networks and defensive systems, but they were no longer the primitive newcomers that alien civilizations remembered. They had become something that the galaxy had never seen before, and they were preparing for whatever challenges the future might bring. 2 years after humanity disappeared from galactic politics, the first cracks began to show in what had seemed like a stable civilization. On the trading world of Kepler Station, merchant Captain Holtevex of the Crystalline Collective stared at empty cargo holds that should have been filled with rare minerals from the Outer Rim territories. The human traders who had once provided reliable deliveries on schedule were gone, and no alien merchant fleet had managed to replace their efficiency. The problem started small but grew larger every month. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades began experiencing delays and shortages. The human merchant vessels had served as more than just cargo carriers. They had also provided information networks, emergency repairs, and informal diplomatic services that kept commerce flowing between species that barely tolerated each other. Holtevex activated his communication system and tried to contact the mining operations on Asteroid Belt Sigma 7, but received only automated messages stating that the facilities were temporarily closed. The asteroid miners were mostly draconic, a proud warrior species that had little patience for the careful negotiations required to maintain business relationships with other races. Without human intermediaries to smooth over cultural differences and translate business customs, many interspecies commercial agreements simply fell apart. The situation became critical when old territorial disputes that had been dormant for years suddenly exploded into open conflict. The draconic hegemony, frustrated by failed trade negotiations and suspicious of crystalline expansion into formerly neutral space, launched what they called a limited military action against 3 crystalline mining colonies. The attack was swift and devastating, catching the crystalline defenders completely unprepared. Commander Veltar of the Crystalline Defense Fleet found himself facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate his every tactical move. The draconic ship struck with precision and coordination that suggested months of planning. What Veltar did not realize was that the attack had been planned for over a year, held back only by informal agreements that human Diplomats had negotiated between the two species during casual trade discussions. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within days of the first attacks, confident that their standard diplomatic procedures would quickly resolve the conflict. Council Speaker Vexville called for immediate ceasefire negotiations and appointed a committee of neutral species to mediate between the draconic and crystalline representatives. The mediation failed within hours. The draconic delegate, War Speaker Krathel, rejected every compromise proposal with barely concealed contempt. The crystalline representative, Harmony Singer Efevin, responded to each rejection by adding new demands that made agreement even more unlikely. Neither side seemed capable of finding common ground or even understanding the other's perspective. Vexville found himself longing for the humans who had once served as unofficial mediators in dozens of similar disputes. Humans had possessed an unusual ability to understand multiple alien viewpoints simultaneously and find creative solutions that satisfied everyone involved. Without their influence, the careful balance that had maintained galactic peace began to collapse. The war spread rapidly as other species chose sides or were forced into the conflict by geography and old alliances. The methane breathers allied with the crystalline forces, while the silicon-based rocklings joined the draconic fleet. Within weeks, 3 entire star sectors became battlegrounds as the fighting expanded beyond anyone's ability to control. On the edges of human space, long-range sensors detected massive construction projects that defied explanation. Alien Scout ships reported unusual energy signatures and defensive installations that seemed decades ahead of known technology. The few vessels that attempted to probe deeper into human territory encountered something that made their crews question everything they thought they knew about the species they had dismissed as primitive. Captain Vexel of the Zephyrian Scouting vessel Windrider was conducting routine border surveillance when his sensors detected a human ship unlike anything in their databases. The vessel was sleek and elegant, its hull incorporating materials that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. When Vexel tried to scan the ship's interior, his instruments reported readings that made no scientific sense. The human vessel transmitted a simple message on standard communication frequencies. Unknown vessel, you are approaching the boundary of human space. Please state your intentions and maintain your current distance while we verify your status. Vexel was impressed despite himself by the politeness of the message, but he was also troubled by the underlying confidence it displayed. The humans were not pleading or threatening, they were simply stating facts as if they had every right to control this region of space. This is Captain Vexel of the Zephyrian Empire conducting routine patrol operations, he responded. We do not recognize human territorial claims in this sector. The reply came back immediately. Captain Vexel, we have no desire for conflict with Zephyrian forces. However, this region is under human protection. We respectfully request that you conclude your patrol and return to recognized Zephyrian space. Something in the human's tone made Vexel hesitate. During the diplomatic period, humans had always seemed eager to please and anxious to avoid giving offense. This message carried none of that uncertainty. The human speaker sounded calm, confident, and absolutely certain of his authority. Vexel decided to test human resolve by ordering his ship to advance toward the boundary. The response was immediate and shocking. The human vessel simply vanished from the sensors, reappearing seconds later directly in front of his ship at a distance that should have been impossible to achieve so quickly. Captain Vexel, you have 30 seconds to reverse course, the human voice said, still polite but now carrying an edge that made the alien captain's scales bristle with instinctive alarm. We do not wish to escalate this situation, but we will protect human space from all unauthorized intrusions. For the first time in his military career, Vexel found himself genuinely afraid of a human. The ship in front of him displayed technology that was clearly superior to anything in the Zephyrian fleet, and the human captain spoke with the confidence of someone who knew he held all the advantages in this confrontation. Vexel ordered his ship to withdraw, but the encounter left him deeply disturbed. He immediately transmitted a full report to Zephyrian Military Command. warning that humanity appeared to have made significant technological advances during their isolation period. The report was filed and largely ignored by commanders who were more concerned with the expanding war between the draconic and crystalline forces. The galactic conflict continued to worsen as more species were drawn into the fighting. Ancient grudges and territorial disputes that had been suppressed for generations erupted into violence. The Galactic Council's authority crumbled as member species ignored their rulings and pursued their own military objectives. In the midst of this chaos, a few far-sighted individuals began to realize that humanity's withdrawal had removed a stabilizing influence that they had never fully appreciated. The humans had served as neutral mediators, efficient traders, and innovative problem solvers whose contributions had held galactic civilization together in ways that no one had understood until they were gone. 3 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy was dying. The war that had started between the draconic hegemony and the crystalline collective had spread like a plague, consuming entire star systems, and dragging previously neutral species into conflicts that served no purpose except mutual destruction. On the emergency command station orbiting the Council homeworld, Speaker Vexthal stared at tactical displays that showed red zones of combat spreading across 6 sectors of known space. The latest reports were worse than anything he had seen in his centuries of service. The Silicon Rocklings had declared total war on the methane breathers after a failed peace negotiation had ended with the assassination of 3 diplomatic delegations. The aquatic depths dwellers had blockaded all shipping lanes through their territory, effectively cutting the galaxy in half. Even peaceful species like the plant people of the garden worlds had been forced to arm themselves as refugees flooded their system seeking safety that no longer existed anywhere. Vexthal's forearms moved restlessly as he reviewed casualty reports that climbed higher every day. Entire fleets had been destroyed in battles that accomplished nothing except creating more hatred between species that had once traded peacefully. The careful balance of power that had maintained galactic civilization for thousands of years had collapsed in less than 3 years without the humans who had somehow held it all together. The council chambers themselves reflected the chaos outside. More than half the delegate platforms stood empty as species either joined the fighting or retreated to defend their homeworlds. The few remaining representatives spent their time arguing about blame and demanding military support that no one could provide. The mighty Galactic Council had become a collection of frightened aliens shouting at each other while their civilization burned. The worst news came from deep space, monitoring stations that detected energy signatures unlike anything in recorded history. Ancient automated systems in the galactic core had awakened after millennia of dormancy, and the signals they transmitted made even the most experienced xenorchaeologists shiver with dread. The readings suggested massive mechanical constructs moving between star systems, consuming everything in their path with the methodical efficiency of machines designed for nothing except destruction. Dr. Lithara, the Council's chief science advisor, presented her analysis with trembling appendages that betrayed her fear despite her attempt to maintain professional composure. The entities emerging from the core match historical records of the Devourers, a mechanical species that consumed 3 major civilizations before entering dormancy 12,000 years ago. Their technology appears to be completely intact, despite the passage of time. The silence that followed her words was broken only by the humming of life, support systems, and the distant explosions of ships destroying each other in the space around the station. Every delegate present understood the implications of her report. The Devourers had returned at the worst possible moment, when galactic civilization was already tearing itself apart through internal conflicts. How long do we have before they reach inhabited systems? Asked Coordinator Menthaval of the gaseous cloud swimmers, one of the few species that had managed to avoid being drawn into the current wars. Dr. Lithara consulted her instruments with movements that betrayed her nervousness. At their current rate of advancement, the first Devourer fleets will reach the outer colonies within 6 months. Based on historical records, we estimate they will consume the entire galactic civilization within 2 years. unless stopped by coordinated military action. The word coordinated hung in the air like a death sentence. The assembled delegates looked around at each other with expressions that needed no translation. Coordination was impossible when every major species was either fighting each other or preparing for war. The military forces that might have stood against the Devourer threat were scattered across dozens of battlefields, destroying each other instead of preparing for the real enemy. Vextel found himself thinking about the humans who had once sat in these chambers offering partnership and mutual defense agreements. He remembered dismissing their proposals as the naive dreams of a primitive species that did not understand galactic realities. Now he realized that the humans had understood something that the established powers had missed entirely. They had seen that survival required cooperation between species, not the domination of the weak by the strong. The emergency session continued for days, as desperate delegates proposed increasingly unrealistic solutions. Some suggested attempting to negotiate with the Devourers, ignoring the historical fact that the mechanical entities had never shown any interest in communication. Others proposed fleeing to distant galaxies, abandoning their homeworlds to save small populations of survivors. Every suggestion was debated and rejected as military reports brought news of more defeats and more systems falling to either the ongoing wars or the advancing Devourer fleets. It was old Zender of the Altarian Federation who finally spoke the words that everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. The ancient philosopher had remained silent through most of the debates, but now he rose slowly from his meditation platform and addressed the chamber with the authority that came from centuries of accumulated wisdom. "We need the humans," he said simply, his words carrying clearly through the vast space despite his quiet tone. "We dismiss them as primitives, but they were the ones who prevented these wars through informal diplomacy. They were the ones who found solutions when our formal procedures failed. They were the ones who understood that our strength came from cooperation, not competition." The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates protested the suggestion. The Zephyrian military representatives insisted that their fleets could handle any threat without human assistance. The crystalline survivors demanded that the Council focus on ending the current wars before worrying about ancient mechanical threats. The few draconic delegates present roared challenges at anyone who suggested their warrior culture needed help from former servants. Vextel raised all four arms for silence, a gesture that had once commanded instant respect throughout the galaxy. Now it took several minutes for the arguing delegates to quiet down enough for him to speak. When he finally addressed the chamber, his words carried the weight of absolute desperation. "Send a message to the humans," he ordered, his voice breaking slightly as he spoke words that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. "Tell them that the Galactic Council formally requests their assistance in defending civilization against the Devourer threat. Tell them that we are prepared to discuss new terms for their participation in galactic affairs." The message was composed and transmitted within hours, sent on emergency channels that would reach human space faster than any previous communication. The text was simple but carried implications that every species understood. The proud Galactic Council was asking for help from the species they had once offered to enslave. The response came back faster than anyone expected, transmitted from the human homeworld with the authority of their planetary government. President Elena Rodriguez's words were read aloud in the council chamber by the communications officer, and each sentence hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. The United Earth government acknowledges receipt of the Galactic Council's request for assistance. Humanity is prepared to consider returning to galactic affairs under the following conditions: complete recognition of human territorial sovereignty, equal representation in any future galactic government, and formal acknowledgement that all future agreements will be negotiated between equals. We await your response. The human fleet that emerged from the hyperspace jump point near the shattered remains of Galactic Council Station was unlike anything the assembled alien forces had ever seen. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the flagship UES Unity, watching as his sensors registered the shocked reactions of alien vessels that had been expecting the primitive ships. they remembered from the diplomatic period. Instead, they faced an armada of sleek vessels that seemed to bend light around their hulls and moved with precision that defied conventional physics. Lisa Kane, now serving as chief diplomatic officer for the returning human delegation, stood beside Morrison as they approached the emergency meeting point. Through the main viewer, she could see the desperate collection of alien ships that represented all that remained of galactic military power. Crystalline vessels showing battle damage from ongoing wars floated next to Zephyrian cruisers that had been hastily recalled from combat zones. Even species that had been fighting each other for years were now forced to work together against the Devourer threat. The communications channel crackled to life as Speaker Vexthal's voice reached the human fleet. Admiral Morrison, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I welcome humanity back to civilized space. We are prepared to discuss the terms you outlined in your response. Morrison's reply was calm but carried an authority that made even veteran alien commanders pause. Speaker Vextal, humanity returns not as supplicants but as equals. We will help defend this galaxy because it is the right thing to do, but the old order that treated us as servants is finished forever. The first joint briefing took place aboard the Unity in a conference room that had been designed to accommodate multiple alien species. General Patricia Woods, humanity's new military commander, presented tactical analyses of the Devourer threat using holographic displays that showed detail beyond anything alien science could achieve. The assembled alien officers watched in amazement as human computers processed battle data in real time and generated tactical solutions faster than their best strategists could think. Dr. Richard Stone's research teams had prepared comprehensive technical briefings about human advances during the isolation period. The quantum communication systems alone represented a breakthrough that would revolutionize galactic civilization, allowing real-time coordination across interstellar distances. The defensive technologies that human engineers had developed could protect entire planets from the energy weapons that made Devourer fleets so devastating, but the most impressive demonstration came when the first Devourer scout ships appeared at the edge of the system. The mechanical vessels were massive constructs that had once terrified entire civilizations, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets and energy shields that had never been penetrated by conventional forces. Every alien in the combined fleet expected to witness the beginning of their final defeat. Admiral Morrison calmly ordered his ships into formation as the Devourer vessels approached. The human fleet moved with coordination that seemed almost telepathic, each ship knowing exactly where it needed to be without apparent communication. When the mechanical enemies opened fire with weapons that had destroyed thousands of alien vessels, the human ships simply absorbed the energy and redirected it back at their attackers. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes. Human weapons that fired concentrated bursts of exotic matter tore through Devourer shields as if they did not exist. Defensive systems that had protected the mechanical entities for millennia failed completely against human attacks that operated on principles alien science had never discovered. When the last Devourer vessel exploded in a brilliant flash of released energy, the combined alien fleet sat in stunned silence. Commander Lisa Kane's voice cut through the communication static as she addressed the assembled forces. This was just a scouting force. The main Devourer fleet is still advancing from the galactic core, but now we know their technology can be defeated. What we need is coordination between all species and the will to work together instead of fighting each other. The weeks that followed saw the most intensive diplomatic effort in galactic history. Lisa Kane worked 80-hour days negotiating between species that had been trying to destroy each other just months earlier. Her team of human diplomats possessed an understanding of alien psychology that allowed them to find common ground where traditional negotiations had failed completely. The breakthrough came when Lisa proposed the Grand Alliance, a temporary military cooperation agreement that focused on defeating the Devourer threat while leaving political questions for later resolution. The key insight was treating each species as an equal partner with unique strengths rather than trying to establish hierarchies of power and influence. The crystalline forces provided defensive technologies that complemented human innovations perfectly. Draconic warriors brought tactical expertise and fierce determination that proved invaluable in ground combat situations. Even the methane-breathing species contributed specialized knowledge about deep space operations that helped human strategists plan long-range campaigns. Admiral Karen Brooks commanded the joint task force that engaged the main Devourer fleet near the galactic core. The battle raged for 3 days across 12 star systems as mechanical hordes that had once consumed entire civilizations met coordinated resistance for the first time in their existence. Human tactical coordination allowed alien forces to operate at maximum efficiency, while human technology provided weapons and defenses that could actually damage. Devourer vessels. The turning point came when Dr. Stone's research teams discovered that Devourer technology depended on quantum resonance patterns that could be disrupted by precisely calibrated energy pulses. Human ships equipped with the new weapons could disable entire Devourer fleets by targeting their central control systems. The mechanical entities that had seemed unstoppable suddenly found themselves helpless against enemies who understood their fundamental weaknesses. The final victory celebration took place on Earth, where representatives from dozens of species gathered to sign the charter that established the new Galactic Federation. President Elena Rodriguez addressed the assembled delegates from the same chamber where humanity had voted for isolation just 4 years earlier. Her words carried the weight of a species that had transformed from dismissed newcomers to respected leaders through determination and cooperation. The new government structure gave every species equal representation regardless of size or military power. Decisions would be made through consensus building rather than domination by the strongest forces. Most importantly, the Federation Charter explicitly prohibited any species from treating another as servants or subjects. Admiral Morrison, now serving as the Federation's first military commander, stood before the assembled delegates and reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Humanity had left the Galactic Council as rejected outcasts and returned as the architects of a new order based on cooperation rather than competition. The ceremony concluded with delegations from every member species establishing embassies on Earth, eager to learn from the humans who had shown them that survival required working together rather than fighting each other. As the delegates departed for their homeworlds, they carried with them the knowledge that the galaxy had finally found leaders who understood that true strength came from unity rather than domination. The stars themselves seemed brighter as ships from dozens of species traveled the trade routes that humans had reopened, carrying goods and ideas that would transform galactic civilization. Humanity had found its place among the stars not as conquerors or servants but as the bridge builders, who showed the universe that cooperation was stronger than conflict.